Marine reacts to SCP-682, also known as the Hard to Kill Reptile, versus SCP-076, also known as Able, by SCP Illustrated. As always, I'm going to be posting a link to the original video and channel down in the description below, so go ahead and make sure that you check them out. So this is going to be our first SCP versus SCP video, and I'm interested as far as knowing how they're actually going to do this. Are they going to do it in terms of making a list of strengths, weaknesses, personal experience, or fighting experience? And then are they just going to combine them and they kind of give a rough guess as to who would win? Or are they going to tell it in the form of a story, like kind of like a SCP tale? So I don't really know how it's going to be told, but we do have 682, Hard to Kill Reptile, insane regeneration, adaptability, and then we have Able. Not only can he take a lot of damage, but he can actually warp these certain dark weapons from a little pocket dimension that he has. So on the one hand, one is hard to kill because of his abilities, and the other one, even if you kill him, he's just going to resurrect in his tomb. So this kind of seems like a battle that probably wouldn't have a victor. Maybe a victor in a couple battles, but nothing too huge. Comment down below, who do you think is going to win? Or if you've already seen it, you know. But as of right now, I have my money on 682 just because I feel like he has more at his disposal to be able to take on Able. But before we get into the actual SCP video, don't forget to like, subscribe. It really does help me out a lot. Hit that notification bell right there so you get notified every time I do upload. Sometimes uploading twice a day. Typically working on them in the mornings and releasing them in the late afternoon to late evening. That way when you all get off work, you can enjoy these videos at your leisure. So without further ado, let's go ahead and see who would win between 682 and 076.
The Warrior and the Dragon. Able paced towards the towering monstrosity casually, nonchalant in his motions, swaggering and grinning as he did so. A massive two-handed claymore was held in place over one of his shoulders, the whirring gears and saws that covered its surface trundling away noisily, while the many small blades that made up its jagged edge slowly slid across the rim, contently, purring like a cat. The beast in front of him was monolith in the sparse landscape, a monument of destruction, the waves of hatred and anger radiating off of its frame palpable, rivaling even Abel's lust for bloodshed. It simply stood there, a mass of heavily plated carapace and flesh, small black eyes in its mammoth skull like holes into the void, resting malevolently above thick serrated fangs slick with drool. Even as he approached it, it was steadily changing, its tissue warping, the plates and armours growing thicker, mounds of muscle and sinew and bone sliding over each other incessantly, all in a bid to reform into something that would better stand this coming assailant. Truly, this was a godhead of annihilation, a being that embodied the primal destruction of existence. He could hardly contain his glee.
Alright, so straight out of the gate, we really got Able kind of being cocky, the way he's walking, right? And 682, on the other hand, is actually starting to already adapt because he knows that. Because it's already seeming like he knows that Able isn't someone that you take lightly, which, for obvious reasons. So, this is interesting.
After all this time, after the weight of centuries, he would actually meet a being that could surpass his capacity for violence. Maybe. He walked until he was mere feet from its colossal form, and after a moment to savour this wondrous anticipation that he was feeling, he spoke up. I have heard tales of creatures like you, glorious beasts of scale and flesh, talon and fang, a prowess in battle even greater than the immense intellect hiding behind those bestial eyes. They say your kind once ruled the earth from enormous stockpiles of treasure, killing and eating all who displeased you. But you were knocked from your throne, one by one, by the great warriors who walk this world no longer, until there were no more, and you became but mere myth, he whispered breathlessly. Even I had thought you to be nothing but fairy tales. But yet, here you stand before me, a living dragon. There was a rumble from the beast, and its mouth began to move, cracking open slowly as a statue came suddenly to life. Pathetic, it grumbled, its voice thick and heavy, like a mountain collapsing into itself 1,000 times over.
A dragon?
You simple little pile of rot. You understand nothing, as I would expect of a well-trained lapdog. At this, Abel's expression darkened, and the sound of the sword on his shoulder began to pick up as the blades twirled ever so faster. "What?" he said slowly, in a low voice that spoke of rage barely contained. "That is what you are, is it not? A trained and broke mutt, bound with a collar and all," it murmured, gesturing slightly towards the thick metal choker around his shoulders and neck. "I chose this," he replied stiffly, his face contorted into scowl. "Whether you chose it or not, you are still a dog."
Alright, so far, I like the way that this is being told. I understand that's not going to be a strengths, weaknesses, fighting prowess type deal, and then they're going to smash them together. So, it's really being told as a tale, which I really like, because it's also given a little bit of a depth of personality to these two SCPs. For example, 682, he's coming off as very logical, cool-headed, can get under people's skin, which is showing us with Abel, mentioning his collars. And Abel is coming off as really like hot-blooded, hot-headed. And I just like the way the SCP Illustrated is portraying these two. And then like really kind of building up that who's going to win aspect, right? Because as of right now, both seem very confident.
"Hands rather than a bowl," it sneered, the expression almost visible on his inhuman face. Abel's face twitched, and he tightened his grip on the handle of his weapon, the revolving blades now turning at a considerable speed, protesting with a dull screech. "At least I can choose my fate," he roared angrily, launching his sword with a downward swing at the beast's head like an almighty wrath of some obscene god. But the creature responded in a way Abel had never seen in all his millennia of fighting. It headbutted the weapon, the top of its skull and shell shattered into bulky fragments, its eyes bulging as the inside of its cranium was pulverized. One of its eyes burst with a wet pop, and torrents of thick, viscous fluid gushed from its mouth, chunks of meat and tissue pouring forth like a fountain of blood and gore. But in headbutting the blade, Abel was thrown off balance by the force of it, recoiling from the attack automatically, leaving his stomach wide open. In that split second of defenselessness, his sight was filled with a gargantuan fist of the monster, a boulder-sized bulk of bony plate ploughing into his entire torso, smashing into him with the force of a hurricane and knocking his sword from his hands. He was flung over 10 meters away like a rag doll, demolishing innumerable objects in his way. His body skidded heavily against the ground, shredding the cloth and skin from his back, until he finally came to an abrupt stop, half embedded in a large boulder. He hung there limply, streams of blood pouring from his eyes, nose, mouth and ears, his face slack in a stunned expression of amazement. And then he laughed. He laughed long and hard, smiling and baring his pointed teeth in a bloody smirk that made it appear that he had just finished a gruesome meal. He spoke up in a language long dead, but the meaning of the words he said were unmistakable.
This is just like one of those anime moments. The dude absolutely gets bodied and then smiles and said, "Alright, let's do this." I don't know. We'll see how well he does, because so far it doesn't look very great for him.
He was issuing a challenge. But to his surprise, the lizard looked like it was having some kind of seizure. It was repeatedly sucking air in through its nostrils, puffing itself up even bigger than it was normally, and consuming the viscous-soaked blood dirt quickly, its huge claws scrabbling away at the ground and stuffing chunks of it into its toothy maw. And then something amazing happened. The wound, which had warped the creature's skull into a shape reminiscent of an overripe tomato, began to undo itself. The beast's head shifting back into its regular shape, the broken plates buckling and falling off to be consumed once more, and revealing a shiny wet carapace formed under the old, even thicker than the last. Fate! What would you understand of fate? Fate is life, and you and all of this is death! the creature bellowed, beginning to charge towards him. At this, Abel chuckled. "Well, I can't argue with that," he replied gleefully, pulling an enormous mace out of the shadows of his ragged cloak. Its handle well over 6 feet in length, its head nothing more than a mass of whirling spikes, screaming obscenely as they spun in an intricate pattern of death. The beast lumbered towards him quickly, its mighty footsteps causing the earth to shake, clods of dirt torn up in its wake, bearing down on him with the force and inevitability of an avalanche. Abel pulled back, standing sideways, moving his arms back behind him, grinding his feet into the ground. He turned towards the impending disaster, swinging his weapon idly with a seasoned flair. And then the beast was upon him, and he swung, time seeming to stop as his weapon once more collided with the creature's head. There was a deafening crunch as its head was crushed again, splattered into pieces, its spine impacting, the monster becoming visibly shorter as the unstoppable force propelling it met with the immovable force colliding with it. The sheer amount of chaos generated by these two immense forces meeting launched the reptile several dozen meters away, spinning like an errant missile, lumps of it flying off as it sailed through the air. It hit the earth with a boom, bits and pieces of its frame dotting the landscape around the impact crater like raindrops during spring showers. Abel cracked his neck, ignoring the blood streaming down the thick gash in his leg or the free along his chest, gained when his opponent slashed at him as he swung. Instead, he discarded the now bent and still mace behind him with an uncaring toss, popped his shoulders back into place with a jerky, awkward shrug, and started to reset his shattered elbow. The creature pushed itself up, eating everything around it, growing heavier, thicker, and more rock-like in appearance. It shook off the excess blood from its form like a dog, droplets of thick, dark liquid splattering the earth around it, and began to clump out of the crater.
Alright, so real quick, 682. For some reason, it seems like he doesn't even try to block or defend himself. He's taking a lot of these attacks, and attacks from other documents as well, just head on, most likely to trigger his adaptability skill. And for a while, I wasn't really sure if it was he needs to be hurt in order for it to kick in, or if he can just do it beforehand by, say, looking at someone, kind of like how he did in here when he saw Abel. He already started to, he did something with the skin to start increasing like how much he can take, essentially. That's just an interesting thought that kind of popped in my head as soon as I saw this, because he's kind of just running into Abel's swings.
It lumbered over the lip of the fissure it created, only to be greeted by a large chakram shredding into its flesh, the ring digging in as the exterior saw blade spun and forced it even deeper into the wound. Several more followed suit, flying from Abel's hands as he drew them out of the shadows, running towards his opponent. He threw himself into the air, unleashing a monstrous axe from the folds of his cloak and hammering down onto his opponent like a bomb. It shrugged off the attack as a horse does a gnat, trying to swat Abel with its huge clawed hands. He dodged and weaved around its sailing fists, planting drill-like daggers into its thick hide, leaving them to rip and tear into its flesh. Whenever an attack would come close to landing on him, he would pull himself aside, using an embedded knife close at hand. Still, the creature showed no sign of slowing its attacks, or even that it had felt any pain at all. It was single-minded in its assault, with only one objective in its sight: kill. Suddenly, a stray claw caught Abel across the shoulder, causing him to stumble. He was rewarded for this again with another crushing fist to the gut, pinning him solidly to the ground. The beast lifted its other claw to deal the finishing blow, an executioner's axe raised for its unsightly purpose, then descending in a flash of light and shadow. It raised its hand again to crush whatever remained of Abel, but it was mildly surprised to find that his arm suddenly ended at the elbow, a river of molten blood flowing freely from the wound. The other arm quickly followed suit, snipped off at the joint by a gigantic mechanical pair of scissors held by Abel, the inner blades spinning feverishly, fresh gore spraying from their moving teeth. The monster attempted to consume the fallen limbs and replace what it had lost, only to meet the bladed boot of Abel, kicking it directly in the bottom of the jaw and knocking it onto its back. Abel fell onto the prone creature like a jackal onto its prey, laying into the creature with an animalistic ferocity, screaming incoherently in his berserker blood rage. He kept pounding on the beast with his weapons, pulling out a fresh one each time another got too deeply lodged to pull out or broken from the sheer strain. Eventually he pulled back, his breathing heavy, drenched completely in vile smelling crimson liquid, a bloody, hellish apparition. He watched it still struggle to breathe, its body still trying to reform itself. And that was when he saw it. A pulse emitted from the creature, a shockwave that forced aside the very fabric of reality, the world warping around the beast as a shock of electricity quickly ran across its mutilated body. But whatever it was, he did not care. It expected no quarter, and he would give it none. It looked at him weakly, blatant disgust and hatred, still as strong, still as clear as it had always been. He pulled a last long sword out of his shredded cloak and intended to deliver the final blow. The beast bared its fangs and shot up as his sword descended. His blade buried itself in the roof of the creature's mouth, travelling straight through its brain and out the top of its head, the blade still spinning as they ripped through the pulsing grey matter. Still the monster lived, its toothy maw wrapped around Abel's arm. It eyed him smugly and gently, almost reverently, bit directly through his arm, ivory teeth effortlessly slicing through muscle and bone to meet together with a light click. Abel staggered back in surprise, and the creature roared back, headbutting him in the skull with a piercing crack, knocking him onto his arse. It gave him a final cold look, and opened its mouth to consume him. Before its jaws closed around him, Abel grabbed the sword still embedded in its head, grasping the hilt from inside its mouth. As the beast's mouth closed around him, he forced it down with all of his strength, slicing the beast clean in two. But its motions, once set in action, could not be stopped. The teeth cleaved his upper torso in two, freeing his remaining arm and head to flop lifelessly on the ground. With his final moments of consciousness, Abel thought he could hear a strange whistling sound, like something falling from a great height. Then, only darkness. Time passed as a dreamless sleep, and Abel awoke to find himself whole and anew, back in his tomb. He moved jerkily, forcing open the coffin that held him, pushing aside the chains hurriedly in a bid to get out of that bitter cold. It took him several minutes to unhook the stone door that blocked his escape, all the time pouring at the frosty ground of his boots, his breath crystallizing in front of him. When he finally did emerge, he breathed a sigh of relief. He had never liked the cold, being more of a man for heat and warmth. Still, he reasoned to himself, that was most likely the best fight he had had in ages. There should be a feast to celebrate with all of his team. Now where had they put that strange pizza box?
Alright, so let's talk about that for a minute. Obviously, nothing as far as questions come up because this isn't necessarily meant to be read as a document. So just kind of like, it was kind of just like a fun versus between two SCPs, who would win. Not really relying on, say, the stats or anything. It's just very fun to see how somebody would write this and present it. And honestly, bottom line, I don't think there would ever be really a victor. I mean, one regenerates like crazy. No matter what they've done, they haven't been able to take him out. The other one, on the other hand, can be killed, but he's going to regenerate eventually in his tomb. So as far as taking those key factors out, like, for example, if you said 682 does have regenerative ability still, but it's limited as far as like the insane amount that it can actually do as far as repairing itself from just like little specks, and that Abel wouldn't get resurrected back in the tomb. So now you've dumbed down two of their abilities, and it would be interesting to see then how exactly this would turn out. Neither one of them really can get a second chance. But I mean, that's just an interesting thought as far as that goes, because either way, neither seems like they can really lose, at least in the long run. And also at the end, I kind of saw it coming, but it was still interesting to see how it did happen as far as making it when you got two iconic beings in their own respective universe, and you're putting them together, people are gonna have favorites on either or, and then you make it basically a tie. However, in this case, it did seem like Abel. Again, if Abel and 682's abilities were kind of powered down a little bit so that they wouldn't come back alive, it does seem like Abel most likely would have won, just because it seemed like he died after. And obviously, I know 682 didn't die, but just for this theoretical version of it, right? And also, another big reason probably would have been that 682, he just pretty much takes every hit on purpose to use his regenerative ability. So it really does seem like Abel probably would have the upper hand. But I mean, that's just my opinion. Comment down below, who do you think would win if their powers were dumbed down a little bit so that they didn't really have a second chance. But that's going to go ahead and do it for this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, really does help me out a lot. Hit that dislike button if you didn't like it. It helps me improve the channel. If you're curious to see what's coming up next, check the description down below. You can see a list of about 5, top to bottom. That's going to be how I view them. And also real quick, if you made it this far, I think it's insane the amount of growth this channel has had in just the past couple days. Like, just a couple days, we were barely at like 600, and now it's already almost to 1,000. And I never really thought that would ever happen, especially like that quick. But I just want to say thank you for everyone who's been supporting me, liking the videos, commenting on the videos. Really does mean a lot. And we're already almost at 1,000. I mean, and that's crazy because we barely started at the beginning of this year. And I just want to say thank you, you know, from like the bottom of my heart. And I'm going to keep doing my thing. Hopefully y'all stay here and enjoy these videos. But thank you. I'm excited to see how much more this channel can grow within the next couple months. But until then, I'll see you all in the next video. Bye.